But Times Dick Kissed Wally. Kind of. Plus one time Wally kissed him. And then some. By Evermoon 2097. A Batman all media types fanfiction. Rated for teen and up audiences. With additional tags for... We're stretching the definition of kiss with this one. 5 + 1 things. Dick Grayson loves Wally West. Wally West loves Dick Grayson. Romani Dick Grayson. Indirect kisses. Implied/referenced child abuse. Child abuse. Bad parent Rudolph West. Hurt comfort. Canon typical violence. Dead Jason Todd. Grief/mourning. Presumed dead Wally West. Wally West is alive. Bad coping mechanisms. Getting together. Bisexual disaster Wally West. Brief mention of Dick's many traumas. Sorry, freeform. This was meant to be short and fluff. Then number 2 got out of hand. Then number 4, help. Short Wally West. Or, at least shorter than Dick. I will die on this hill. Man gives off short energy. I don't make the frickin' rules. I don't care that he should be a tall and lanky runner. Fuck you, heart. Holy shit, this ended up being angstier than planned. I swear this was meant to be cuter and fluffier. Angst. Eventual happy ending. No smut. Wally West-centric. Summary. Wally finally let his heart rate begin to slow, massaging the ice pack deeper into his throbbing shoulder. Dick, was sitting beside him, carefully wrapping his wrist, a popsicle stick serving to set the sprain. With one last gentle squeeze, Dick released his hand. Okay, you should be fine in the morning. Try to stick to kicks on patrol. Even with your healing factor, you might still feel sore, he instructed. Wally felt his mouth quirk up. Okay, worrywart. What, you not gonna kiss it better? Dick's eyes glinted, and before Wally knew it, Dick had grabbed his hand and dramatically popped a smooch on his wrapped wrist, before looking up and sticking his tongue out at him. Wally stuck his own out in retaliation, blowing a raspberry. Or a collection of fics that get progressively longer and more out of my own control, where Wally gets a friend abused, bludgeoned, and killed, and Dick gets a friend worries, traumas, and grief. Yikes. They end up happy, though. 1. Wally wrinkled his nose as he breathed in the smog of Gotham. Somehow it was even worse higher up. He peered down at the cars bustling below him, kicking his feet a little when he saw a Gothamite glance up. The other boy, Robin, plopped down beside him, joining his people watching. Wally didn't quite know what to make of the boy. He was small, practically swamped in his yellow cape. The bright green and red of his outfit was stark against Gotham's gloom. He seemed unbothered by his lack of pants, despite the rough asphalt of the roof and the cold wind kicking up at them. And yet, despite how out of place he seemed to be in Gotham, all of that melted away in the heat of battle. Wally had barely even seen the kid, only the unconscious goons and broken windows in his wake. Well, those and his jeering cackle that echoed in the warehouse. The boy beamed up at Wally, his domino mask crinkling at the edges. Not a care in the world, he thought to himself. Gothamites really were a different breed, Wally thought with a shudder, managing a smile back at the kid. The Flash says, "You've been doing this for a while?" "Yep," Robin replied, rocking back and forth. Wally held himself back from pushing the kid away from the ledge. Something told him the kid wouldn't appreciate the gesture. 3 years now. 3 years? How old are you? Wally gasped, his own legs stilling. Robin shrugged. "I don't think B wants me to tell you that." He glanced back towards his mentor. The Dark Knight and Wally's uncle were standing in the shadows of the building. quietly debriefing about the raid tonight, if Wally had to guess. It wasn't anything crazy, just Trickster trying to branch out again. If Wally had to guess, Batman had only called the two speedsters to Gotham because he wanted the man out of his city as soon as possible. Plus, no one wanted to see Trickster team up with a Gotham rogue, especially not the Joker. Now they were just waiting for the all-clear to head home. Barry caught his eye with a smile, and, after a quick nod to Batman, walked over to them. "Hey, you kiddos. Turns out I have to meet with the commissioner. Something about vigilantism in Gotham." His uncle blew a raspberry at the word. "You two alright to hang out here for a bit?" They nodded. One hair ruffle later, and the two heroes were off. The two sat in silence for a minute, only distracted by the cars below and the occasional drunken curse. Robin was eyeing the sidewalks, clearly on the lookout for any signs of trouble. Wally was about to join him in scouting when his stomach let out a grumble. Robin glanced over at him and giggled. "Hey, speedsters use a lot of energy. Besides, I'm a growing boy," Wally defended, glaring at him. Robin kept smiling, now digging in his utility belt. He pulled out 2 granola bars, passing one over to Wally. "Here, B told me to pack a few of these, just in case." Wally accepted the snack, eyebrows raising at the packaging. "Aren't these by Star Labs just for us speedsters? How do you even get these?" The boy's smile turned secretive, the whites of his mask glinting dangerously. "Right, Batman. Never mind," he said hurriedly, digging into his snack. Robin examined the packaging himself, tilting his head thoughtfully. Wally smirked. "You can try it if you want. They have a ton of calories, though." Robin excitedly tore it open, taking a bite. His face scrunched up immediately. Wally laughed. "Yeah, the taste takes some getting used to. I mean, what did you expect? It's made in a lab." Robin pouted at the betrayal, shoving the rest of the bar towards Wally. "You take it." "Gross, you already bit into it." "Agent A says to never waste food," Robin replied smugly, waving it teasingly. When Wally glared at him, he continued, "Besides, you're a growing boy. Plus, I won't burn off all those calories in a night, no matter how much I try." Rolling his eyes, Wally accepted the food, wolfing down the rest of the snack. He was still hungry, anyway. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Robin reach into one of his dozens of pockets and pull out a juice box. He took a sip before offering the rest to Wally. "You're gross. You know that, right? Do you want to wash those things down, or not?" Wally accepted the drink with a grumble, but was unable to hide his smile at Robin's antics. "What, were you raised in a barn?" "No, the circus." "What?" 2. Wally felt his heart rate begin to slow, massaging the ice pack deeper into his throbbing shoulder. Robin, no, Dick, was sitting next to him, carefully wrapping his wrist, a popsicle stick serving to help set the sprain. His gaze drifted out the open window he jumped through, the gardens of the Wayne Manor blooming under the moonlight. Their secret identities had lasted, 2 years? Maybe even less. Batman hadn't been happy, but there was only so much he was willing to do to punish his son. The sap. Don't tell Batman he said that, though. With one last gentle squeeze, Dick released his hand. "Okay, you should be fine in the morning. Try and stick to kicks on patrol. Even with your healing factor, you might still feel sore," he instructed. Wally felt his mouth quirk up. "Okay, worrywart." "What, you're not gonna kiss it better?" Dick's eyes glinted, and before Wally knew it, Dick had grabbed his hand and dramatically popped a smooch on his wrapped wrist, before looking up and sticking his tongue out at him. Wally stuck his own out in retaliation, blowing a raspberry. His best friend let out a laugh, releasing his grip again, and sitting back against the footboard of his bed. Dick's eyes were warm in the dim light, drifting back down to his injured wrist. They turned cold. Wally shifted uncomfortably, feeling the levity dissipate from the air. He curled up with the ice pack pressed between his knees and shoulder, bracing himself. He knew what Dick was about to say. "You should tell Barry." "I told you it's fine," he answered automatically. Wally squeezed his knees together. His legs were about the only part of him that didn't ache at the moment. "I'll be moving out in 2 years anyway." "You could move out faster if you tell someone," Dick argued, voice hard. Wally shut his eyes, ducking his head down as his fist clenched on his sleeve. He hated this argument. What if it gets worse? What if you can't run for help? He bit down hard on his tongue to stop himself from snapping at Dick. "He's just worried. Don't get mad at him. Don't turn him against you too." Truthfully, Wally didn't know what he'd do if he couldn't run to the manor the next time this happened. Because it would happen again. Wally knew that. Rudolph West was nothing if not consistently an asshole. An asshole he was stuck living with until he could skip across the country for college. But it was fine. Wally knew how to protect himself, even against his father's drunken rage. Protect his head, protect his chest, and, for him, protect his legs. Just enough to get out the window, once his father gave up, and run to Gotham. 2 years. Only 2 more years. Wally swallowed, still not looking at his best friend. Can we not talk about this? I'm tired." He deflected, sounding as pathetic as he felt. It was fine. Dick was worried, but he never pushed. He'd just go to sleep, then sneak out before... Dick sat up slowly in the corner of his vision, his chest tight. "Either you tell Barry and Iris, or I will." Wally probably dipped into the Speed Force with how quickly he jerked around, eyes flashing. Green met blue, hard, fierce blue. "No, no, 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 no. You promised me you wouldn't say anything." His voice was shaking, dripping with fear and hurt. Dick took a shaky breath, eyes wet. "I did, but you need help, and it's right there. Why won't you take it? Barry and Iris love you. How do you know that? How do you know what they'll do? What if they don't want me? What if they can't take me in? What if I end up somewhere worse?" Wally spat at him with the argument he'd had with himself hundreds of times. Because what if Robin was wrong? Wally... he didn't think he could take it if Barry and Iris rejected him. He'd rather that question go unanswered. But Dick wasn't done. "Then B will take you in. You'll have a home here. We won't leave you in the system." Wally couldn't help but scoff. "And what, leave Central City and Keystone? My whole life there? Leave behind Kid Flash? No metas in Gotham, remember?" "It won't come to that. Iris and Barry love you." Dick almost yelled, face contorting as he argued. Wally's response died in his throat. He choked it down, vision wavering. Dick was serious. He was going to turn his life upside down, disrupt everything. "If you tell them, I will never trust you again," Wally answered in a low voice, glaring at who he thought was his best friend. "Please, please, please." Dick's eyes grew soft, but they still didn't leave his. "Sorry, but I would rather have you hate me than let you keep getting hurt." A beat passed, breath hanging heavy in the air. Then Wally was on his feet, swinging his legs out of the window, with lightning flicking at his heels. The Speed Force carried him down the wall and away. Far, far away from Wayne Manor. Maybe, just maybe, Dick won't. Maybe he'll leave it be. Just until I can find a way to stop him. He thought to himself, ignoring the tears flying in his wake. Dick swung himself up onto the rooftop, landing easily across from where the Flash stood. Robin's cape hung tight around his shoulders as he made his way towards the hero. Was he really going to do this? Betray his best friend? Maybe Wally was right. Maybe he would be fine, and Dick should just leave well enough alone. His throat tightened, remembering the expansive bruises blooming across his friend's back, the first time he'd come to Dick for help. The shaking of his jaw, the shudder down his spine, the way he'd hunched in on himself every time he came over for help, as if trying to make himself smaller. He clenched his fists. No, Wally was too bright, too smart, and too good to let this continue. Dick had to do this, even if it meant Wally would never want to be around him again. Barry turned around, a surprised quirk in his smile. "Robin? What are you doing here, kiddo? Does Bats know you're here? And if you're here for Kid Flash, he isn't patrolling tonight." "I know, I wanted to talk to you about him," Dick said, mouth dry. Confusion flickered across the hero's face before he began to inch closer. Sure. Did you two get in a fight or something?" "Not that, just..." Dick swallowed. He knew this was right. That he was right. That Barry and Iris would give Wally a better home. They would. But Wally's words echoed in his head. The fear that shot through his frame. Dick had to make sure. If Barry wasn't as good as he thought, Dick couldn't be the reason things got worse for Wally. "How much do you love him?" he found himself asking, eyes flickering over the red and gold hero intently. Every lesson Bruce had taught him on body language ran through his mind. He needed to be absolutely sure. For Wally. Barry's eyes widened, with confusion under the cowl. His shoulders relaxed minutely. "Rob," he answered slowly. "You know I adore him. I'd do anything for that kid." "What's..." His eyes narrowed. "Even kill?" Now, that caught the hero's attention. Barry recoiled at the question. The hand that was reaching towards Robin suddenly jerked backwards. "What? Would you kill for him?" Dick demanded, backing away from the speedster. Barry was getting panicked, lightning sparking with his agitation. "Robin, what's..." "Answer the question. Would you kill someone for Wally?" Dick shouted. Very glad that they were far beyond where anyone could hear him. "Fine, yes!" Barry snapped, suddenly stopping his advances. He closed his eyes and took a steadying breath. After a beat, he continued. "If it means that he's happy and safe, without hesitation." His face was suddenly serious. Jaws set as he met Dick's eyes firmly. Dick let out a breath, a weight suddenly being lifted off his shoulders, as Barry continued. "Now, what's going on? Is he in danger? Are you asking me to kill someone for him?" Dick flushed. "No, well, yes, but I doubt it'll come to that. I just needed to make sure." Barry was silent, motioning for him to continue. "Sorry, Wally, it's for the best. Wally's being abused." Alarm rang across Barry's face. The speedster immediately crouched down in front of him. "What?" he asked, in a hushed tone. Now that he had gotten confirmation, that he knew he was right about Barry, the full story flowed easily. And by the time he was done, Barry's blue eyes were haunted. The hero's fist clenched, lightning arcing around his hand. Dick almost wanted to back away, to give the speedster a little space. With what looked like all of his strength, Barry wrestled his hands apart and steadied his voice. Every trace of his anger fled from his frame, being replaced with the Flash Central City adored. Only his eyes betrayed the anger coursing through him. "Thank you for telling me, Robin. I need to go get him now, and we'll sort this out. Don't worry. Iris and I will take him in. He'll be safe. Once this has all been settled, I'll let you know, and you can come visit, okay?" Dick stifled a flinch. "I don't think he'll want to see me. I broke my promise," he muttered, the weight of what he'd done crashing down around him, now that the deed was done. Barry gently laid a hand down on his shoulder. "Come on. You just wanted him to be safe. You're a good friend. Iris and I will talk to him. He'll come around." "No, I knew the price of coming here tonight." Dick shook his head, forcing back the tears. He could go and cry to Bee later. Just make sure he's happy. Mustering up a smile, Dick backed away from the speedster. With a little wave, he swung off the building and back towards the Zeta transport to home. A week later, Dick found Wally standing outside of Wayne Manor with a stack of pizza boxes and a nervous smile. Can we make a new promise? To stay friends and keep looking out for each other, even when the other is being kind of stupid. You weren't being stupid, but you got a deal. 3. Another day, another city under siege by a bunch of statues. Wally skidded to a stop, pitching the furious garden gnome at the empty street below. Ejected. Sorry I'm late, what's the deal here? He said into his comm, eyeing Donna in the distance as she grappled with a massive stone. Maybe a snake?
Thank you for joining us,
Robin replied, sounding out of breath.
Something's brought these to life. Any figures they touch also wake up.
Wally nodded, despite knowing none of the others could see him. He sped down the building, closer to where the commotion seemed to be coming from, shattering any aggressive lawn ornamentation he saw. I assume their goal is bigger than garden decor, he quipped, bowling a stone toad into a few of its buddies. Ceramic pieces rained down, clinking once they hit the ground.
They're moving towards the center of town,
Corey confirmed, flying overhead and shooting down a rabbit in greeting.
KF, scout around to see who's controlling them. Call for backup when you find them. We'll handle the army,
Robin ordered in his ear. Wally couldn't help but smile. What, no please? You're not feeling the aster, boss man? He asked, already combing the city for the perpetrator. Dick muttered something that sounded like, shut up, and Wally privately smiled to himself. He'd made it too easy.
I think I know what they're going after,
Donna announced.
The city center is a cathedral with a bunch of gargoyles.
Robin let out a grunt.
BB, sigh, help Donna guard the church. Let's see if we can clip their wings. Raven, you and I are gonna see if they have any other targets.
The other Titans let out affirmatives, the sound of battle gradually fading away as Wally continued his search, shattering through an art class worth of sentient figurines. At least there weren't any civilians out and about, likely having barricaded themselves at home once the attack started. This is getting ridiculous. Did we seriously get called to the middle of South America for a bunch of pottery? He voiced these thoughts, adding that a much more interesting fight would have been against terracotta warriors.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were the stone dragons not enough for you?
Donna chided, her fist crunching against a solid stone in his ears. See, you say that, but I've been through, half the city already, and not a single— Jesus Christ! Wally barely slid under the stone wing that was around the next corner. He stumbled to his feet, coming face to face with a large eagle, its granite eyes landing on him. One of its wings was eroded into just a stump, but the other was thrashing wildly. Between its talons was a kid, a little boy with knees pulled up to his chest. He must have not hit in time. Glowing purple eyes peeked up at the hero over brown arms, tears rolling down his face. A small army of stone snakes writhed in front of him, also turning to face Wally. The eagle let out a shriek. Wally snapped to attention as he jolted away from the sentient gathering.
Shit, Wally's right,
Robin shouted through the comms.
Raven, Corey, guard the city's borders. KF, find the leader now. Raven, help him once he finds them. Everyone else, regroup at the cathedral. Stop them from taking to the sky, and do not let a single statue get away.
A little busy here, Wally called out, dodging another swipe from the eagle, as he tried to goad it away from the child. He'd taken to swinging a bat he had found around at the snakes, sending them flying in his wake. Besides, what am I right about?
Rio de Janeiro is just a handful of miles away. If those statues wake up Christ the Redeemer...
That'd be bad. Got it. Wally took a breath before feigning to his left as the eagle dived at him, swerving under its wing and plucking the child off the ground, bringing them both safely to a nearby roof. In the alley below, the eagle let out a cry, throwing itself uselessly at the brick, while glaring up at them. He dragged them both to an extra few steps away from the edge. The boy in his arms let out a hiccup. I'm sorry, I wanted to feel them. I don't know what happened. His eyes were still glowing, purple light crackling through his fingers as he wiped his eyes. Wally crouched down, patting his back comfortingly. Hey, it's okay. I'm sure whatever happened wasn't your fault, he said soothingly. The boy blinked at him. But it was. Mama said not to touch the statues, but I did. And then it all started to move. He let out another loud sob. Wally balked, the pieces falling into place. Wait, you're a meta? The kid sniffed. A what? He swallowed. Okay, what's your name, kiddo? Davy. Davy choked out, still frowning. Here's the plan, Davy. I'm gonna bring you to the police. They're gonna get in contact with your parents and take care of you for a bit, okay? Stay with them until your parents get here. And then I'll be back to explain everything later, okay? The boy nodded slowly. With a friendly smile, Wally helped the kid climb onto his back and then whisked them away to the nearest police station, quickly explaining the situation to both the cops and his team. And the cops looked at him for confirmation.
So there's no way to stop these things?
Cyborg asked, sounding strained. Aside from what we're already doing, nope. There's no time to teach Davy to control his powers. I'm en route to the cathedral now, Wally answered, swiping a police's metal baton on his way out. I'm borrowing this, by the way. He was gone before the poor cop could even process what he said.
You heard him, Titans. Destroy!
Robin cackled. The rest of the team let out their own strained cheers, followed by the cracking of stone. Wally made it just in time to club off a tiger's paw that was flying towards Garth, before batting a dog away from Cyborg. It shattered into pieces. He winced as the dust settled. A large serpent dove at him, only for Beast Boy, as a gorilla, to grab it out of the air and slam it into the pavement. It writhed out of his grip, and the green hero staggered back as Cyborg ran to help. Wally panted, massaging his shoulder. Geez, you guys weren't kidding about these guys.
Gargoyle's alive. North.
Robin suddenly let out a pained cry, thudding coming from his comm. Rob? Wally was off, flying around the square to where he'd last seen his friend. The boy was slumped against a tree with a grimace, a massive knight bearing down on him, spear in hand. A horse's head lay shattered beside the pair, along with the rest of its body. Time slowed as the knight launched itself forward, thrusting the spear towards Dick's prone form. Lightning licked at his ankles as Wally wrenched more of the speed force into himself, pushing faster and faster towards the pair. His hands grasped around the spear, mere inches away from Dick's chest. He pushes, praying against all luck to redirect the deadly blow. It was just enough. The spear plowed harmlessly into the dirt, sending the knight to its knees and Wally rolling to the ground as his foot caught on the shaft. He looked up just in time for the knight to once again grab the weapon. Wally slid in front of the statue, slamming the police baton into the knight's face, and chest, and arms, willing it to back away from the tree where Dick was still lying limp. When the statue tried to grab him, he dove to the side, sending a crashing blow under its arm, only for the weapon to glance off harmlessly. Whatever this thing was made of was annoyingly dense. Wally was just about to thwart another attempt to grab the spear when the knight's arm caught him around his stomach. He sank to his knees, the wind knocked out of him. His vision came back into focus as the knight was struggling to pull the spear out of the soil. No! Time slowed down as he took the sight in. The knight's weight was braced on one leg, both hands grasping the weapon. If he could knock it off balance, bracing the baton like a knife, Wally drove it into the knight's load-bearing knee as hard as he possibly could, before kneeling under the spear, his own knee positioned under the shaft. It was a simple plan, really. an effort on one end of the beam, a load on the other, and a fulcrum in the middle. Only Wally was betting that this beam would shatter before it would lift. Maybe if Wally wasn't lost in adrenaline and worry, because Dick still wasn't moving, he'd have hesitated before using his own leg as the point of a poorly conceived lever. But alas, here he was, about to definitely fuck up his knee. The baton clanged loudly, cracking into the stone like a chisel. Just as he had hoped, the knight's knee fractured, and its weight was suddenly all put onto the spear. It was poetic, almost, how well his plan worked. The spear cracked cleanly in two over his knee. Too bad he couldn't pat himself on the back because, ow! Fucking... If he wasn't biting back curse after curse, Wally was sure he'd have made a joke about a knee for a knee. But between the bruising on his ribs and the definite breaking of his knee, the hero was just about ready to pass out when the mass beside him began to shift. He barely had the presence of mind to swear before the knight launched itself at him again. Wally landed on his stomach, the taste of dirt suddenly in his mouth. His hands scrambled to find purchase on the dirt, to pull himself free and away. But it was fruitless. 2 stone gauntlets closed tightly around his biceps, pressing down on them. The shaft must have smashed into its helmet on the way down, as dust and rubble trickled down onto Wally from its cracked head. The pressure on his arms only worsened, as hobbling thumps sounded from somewhere behind him. Before he had time to question what the statue was doing, the knight's one remaining knee began to press against his back. Suddenly, the full weight of the knight was on him. Wally screamed. He flexed his back, pushing against the weight with all his might. It wasn't just trying to crush him, it was going to break his spine. He could barely begin to make sense of the world as agony racked his body, all of it centered on the knee forcing itself into the small of his back, and his bones screaming in protest. After what seemed to be an eternity, the weight was suddenly gone, and the knight slammed down near him. He let out a relieved whimper. Through hazy eyes, he saw a black cape descend on the statue, the sound of metal on stone reaching his ears as the world faded into black. Wally was floating. He was warm, the edges of his senses fuzzy. It was nice, the kind of hazy where he knew there was nothing to worry about. Slowly, he tried to grasp what was going on. Even if he didn't have to worry, it'd still be nice to make sure he wasn't dead and stuff. His knee throbbed weakly. Did he trip on something? Wouldn't be the first time. A prick around his wrist? Ah, an IV. Why would... There was an ache around his stomach. Probably some bruising. A fight, then. Right, the knight. Oh, ow. Yep, his back was definitely still hurt. Didn't feel broken, at least. His eyes were closed. He knew that, as his eyelids twitched in pain. He didn't feel like opening them. Something above him shifted. Someone. Only then did he feel the hand in his hair, a thumb rubbing slowly against his hairline. It was nice. Moments later, the ache in his back seemed to abate slightly, and a soft feeling of heat brushed against his cheek. That was someone's breath. Someone nice. Maybe Aunt Iris or Uncle Barry. They'd probably be called to Titan's Tower after what happened. He hoped someone remembered to go back for Davy. He'd have to check that later. But for now, he'd just enjoy the hand in his hair, and the soft breath near his face, and the mumbling of the air. The mumbling? Now that he was paying attention, Wally could hear soft, melodious sounds coming from whoever was kneeling at his forehead. Yep, definitely Aunt I. He didn't try to make out the words, just letting himself fuzz in and out, enjoying the warm peace. His back barely even hurt now. There was no point in trying to keep track of time, feeling his senses go in and out, and a hand in his hair, running its thumb up and down, up and down, up and down. A smile was tugging at his face, and he felt his head turn towards his aunt's warmth. The humming stopped, the low sound of laughter reaching his ears. It was familiar. The breath was hot against his eyes now. Suddenly, a light kiss was pressed against his forehead, and the lips pulled away. So did the hand. An undignified whine escaped his throat, his eyes cracking open at the loss of contact. He pouted as the room came into focus, eyes eventually landing on someone's surprised face, clearly about to turn away from him. Bright eyes, dark hair, and a red face. Oh, it was Dick. His pout slipped away back into a smile. "You're okay," he mumbled. Suddenly, Dick was much closer, the familiar warm breath back on his cheek. It smelled like artificial berries. "Huh, yeah. Surprised you're awake." "You know nothing can keep me down," Wally answered, his voice slurring. He blinked at nothing. "I'm on the good stuff." Dick cracked a smile. "Yep, you're looking pretty turbed." "Yeah." His voice went up at the end. Wally smiled dumbly up at his best friend. "Everyone okay?" "Yep," Dick replied, popping the pea. Donna handled the gargoyles. Brought all three of them crashing down to the ground. A good thing she's more durable than those guys. He chuckled lowly. Raven's eye met back up with the kid, by the way. Davy. He's in contact with the League and meta support. He'll be all good. Wally hummed appreciatively, eyes suddenly struggling to stay open. Dick, as observant as ever, eyed him, amused. "Rest up, Walls. You've been through a lot." "Okay." And with that, Wally's eyes slipped shut again, the warmth of his friend at his head. He breathed out heavily. "Thanks for the save, by the way, KF. What would I do without you?" Shuv Mishito. Tukav Tuki. 4. Wally glanced up from his phone, slumped against the couch, her head lolling around. She cast a glance towards him, frowning. "Still no word from Wang?" He felt his stomach sour. "No, I was gonna pay him a visit tomorrow." He trailed off. Donna nodded in understanding. The Titans were collectively giving Dick some space, maybe taking some for themselves too. It wasn't every day they lost one of their own. It wasn't every day they lost Jason. They'd been back for 2 days since the mission to space. Jason had been gone for 24. Wally could still barely believe it. There hadn't even been a message from Bruce for when they got back. The man hadn't even met them at the tower to deliver the news personally. They'd found out through Twitter. Fucking Twitter. They hadn't heard from Dick since he vanished into the Zeta. Alfred had confirmed he had gotten to the manor, but had stopped responding soon after. The Titans agreed to leave them to their grief, at least for a few days. Wally was angry. They all were. At Bruce? Some of them. Mainly Donna, him, and Garth. At Joker? Most certainly. At themselves? Well, they didn't talk about that part. They were heroes, much better with their fists than their words. Part of him really wished there were some goons to fight, a mission to distract themselves with. The other part of him knew that none of them would let Dick on a mission. Not right now, and he probably wouldn't like that, if he even showed up to argue about it. He was just about to suggest they all go out for dinner, maybe Thai, when his phone started vibrating. It was Barbara Gordon, calling. In a short burst of lightning, he was back in his room, phone pressed against his ear. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked quickly. "Dick's not there with you, is he?" Her voice sounded rough, like she had been crying. "I thought he was at the manor." Already a list of places to check were running through his head. Most in Gotham or Bloodhaven, but some places around the world too. You could never know with Zetas. No, after fighting with Bruce, he left for Bloodhaven. Radio silence sense. We only know that he got to his apartment that day, but nothing else. I was hoping I'd missed something and that he'd snuck off to the tower. Wally felt his jaw clench. He knew Babs. She didn't do mistakes. What she meant was that she had only just noticed that Dick had been alone in his apartment for 48 hours after fighting with his dad and learning that his little brother was dead. He stamped down his annoyance. That wasn't fair. She was grieving too. 3 weeks wasn't exactly a lot in terms of mourning. I'll head over right now. I'll pick up some donuts from that bakery near the harbor. He heard the tension drain from her across the line. Sorry for not noticing sooner. You're probably the only one he'll even talk to right now. He was pretty upset at me and B. Wally hummed, already rushing to the Zeta, jacket in hand. Take care of him, okay? She asked, voice soft. He let the pulse of the Zeta tube wash over him and hit the streets of Bloodhaven running. I always will, Wally said curtly, stopping just outside Wallaby's pastries and forcing himself to take a breath. You take care of yourself too. He wouldn't want you to be alone either. Don't worry, I've got my dad and some friends. Thanks for being there for him. After a beat of silence, both of them pointedly ignored the topic of Bruce. She bid him a farewell and let the line go dead. Wally swallowed, glaring briefly across the harbor where Gotham loomed in the distance. That was a problem to deal with later. First, making sure his best friend was okay. 5 minutes later, Wally was skidding to a stop next to Dick's bike, arms full of a dozen donuts. He crouched next to it, slipping open the hidden compartment in the back, the one that held Dick's spare key. Moments later, he was in front of the door. Now, with just a door separating him and his best friend, he hesitated. The air was dusty and stale, but aside from that, nothing was out of the ordinary. Carefully, he let loose a series of firm knocks. Hey Rob, it's me, the Wall Man. I got donuts. He hated how his own voice dripped with fake cheer. He waited. No response. Alright, I stole your spare key, by the way. Mind if I let myself in? Still no answer. Wally was clicking the lock open within seconds, quietly shutting the door behind him. He felt himself pale. There was dried blood on the inside handle, brown and crusted. Barely anything, really, not enough to be any real concern. He glanced down and around, quickly taking in the rest of the apartment. Dick's shoes were notably absent from where he'd normally tossed them, and the duffel from the mission already dropped by the door. It hadn't been unpacked. Dick's bedroom was also untouched, a layer of dust still coating the handle. In fact, the only thing that wasn't covered in dust was the duffel and the single set of footprints from the front door towards his living room. Wally followed them, breath caught in his throat as he dropped the donuts on the counter, separating the hallway and the kitchen as he passed. He rounded the corner, finally finding his best friend. Dick Grayson was slumped at the foot of the couch, his back to Wally, and head tilted listlessly to the side. Wally felt the speed force fill his limbs as he ran around the couch, picking up dust in his wake, coming to a stop when he reached Dick's face. His normally vibrant eyes were bloodshot and sunken. They didn't even twitch towards Wally, staying focused on a point to his left. The only sign that Dick wasn't dead, was awake, was the occasional blink and the slow rise and fall of his shoulders. Wally felt time slow to his whims as he quickly took in the rest of his friend. Dick's hair was oily and matted, clearly untouched from the mission and missing a proper wash. He was still wearing the clothes Wally had last seen him in. His lips were chapped and dry, his entire body eerily still. His right hand's knuckles were split, dried blood coating them, but Wally couldn't even tell if it was Dick's. He wondered if it was Bruce's. Hey, Rob? Dick? You with me, man? He asked softly, feeling loud in the idle space. He drew his hand back from where he was reaching out to his friend, hesitating. In his first sign of acknowledging Wally's presence, Dick's eyes slid over to meet Wally's. He forced back a gulp. The beautiful, clear blue normally customary of Dick Grayson was empty, clouded with motion Wally could only guess at. Instead, he let out a huff through his nose, swallowing uncomfortably. We should get your hand cleaned up. Don't want it to get infected. Wally let himself draw back a little, only just noticing how close he had gotten. Come on. Dick's eyes linger on him a moment longer before sinking to the ground. He didn't move to get up. Consider Wally thoroughly nervous. He'd never seen Dick so empty. He'd always been loud, big. Even as a tiny kid, Robin was a force of nature, be it as the light to Batman's shadow, or a cackle echoing in the minds of villains, or his best friend, cheering at Batburger, or their newest prank. Then, as a Titan, their team leader, pushing them with the years of experience he lorded over them. Dick was almost always larger than life, and Wally counted himself among the lucky few who saw him when he wasn't trying to be. This wasn't any of those. It was like the steady light that was Dick Grayson had taken a rain check, and now he was lost in the clouds. He licked his lips. All right, Wallace. If there was ever a time to step up, now's the fucking time. Don't want to move? He said gently, lingering at the corner of Dick's vision. That's okay, buddy. I'll be right back. He got to his feet at normal speed before dashing towards the kitchen, and grabbing a bowl from the cupboards and turning on the water, letting it warm up to a comfortable degree. He cursed as he checked the fridge and remaining cabinets. Darn Dick for thinking ahead enough to empty his fridge and apartment before a month-long trip. While he waited for the water to heat up, he dove into the bathroom, fishing out Dick's first aid kit and an adequately soft towel. Grabbing the donuts on his way back, Wally laid his collection at Dick's feet, careful not to spill a drop. In front of him, Wally carefully soaked a towel, wringing most of the water out before smiling softly up at his team leader. Slowly, he grasped Dick's injured hand, gently pressing the towel to the smears of blood. Dick's eyes twitched slightly, but he thankfully didn't fight Wally. Taking that as a good sign, he continued his work, gently scrubbing the blood from his knuckles, careful not to irritate the half-scabbed wounds. Just for good measure, Wally dabbed the cuts with antibiotic ointment before wrapping the hand. By the time he was done, Dick's vision had returned to the same corner it was directed towards when Wally had first arrived. He followed the line of sight, finding a small stack of books, clearly arranged in a hurry. On top of the pile was a copy, Jason's copy, of Pride and Prejudice. The little nerd. Wally swallowed, nervously licking his lips before glancing back at Dick. Making a decision, he picked up the bowl and first aid kit, giving the former a quick rinse in the sink while he grabbed a cup. First, he downed the glass himself, his throat dry. Second, he filled it up again and approached Dick. He crouched down. You look like you haven't drank water in days. He wished he was joking. Come on, hydrate or die straight, he joked, putting the rim of the cup against Dick's mouth. It twitched in what Wally hoped was a grin, before opening carefully and allowing Wally to carefully tilt his head back and pour the cool liquid in. He repeated the process 2 more times. Wally sighed, eyeing the donuts. He didn't think he'd have much luck getting Dick to eat anything right now, much less fried balls of sugar, especially if he had actually been slumped against the couch for the last 48 hours, like it was looking. Pick your battles, Wallace, he muttered under his breath before taking a seat beside his friend. Careful not to spook Dick, and if that wasn't the weirdest thing, spooking a bat. Ha! He let his arms wrap around Dick's core, his chest against Dick's back. Almost imperceptibly, Wally felt Dick lean into his touch, and he allowed himself to lean in return, resting his chin on Dick's shoulder and tightening his hold around him. Mind if I sit with you for a while? Dick didn't respond, as expected, but Wally felt him shift slightly and press more of himself against Wally. This drew a smile out of the speedster. feeling some of the tension drain out from his shoulders. They sat like that for a while, adjusting to the steady heartbeat of the other. Or maybe that was just Wally. Idly, he noticed the sun outside beginning to sink below the bay. He was just planning how he could get Dick to take a bath and eat dinner when he felt the body beneath him tense. Dick opened his mouth slowly, seemingly grasping for words. He didn't tell me, he croaked. Wally squeezed a little tighter in encouragement. 3 weeks, and he just didn't tell me. Didn't even delay the funeral, just buried my little brother. His voice broke on the last word. Wally knew he wouldn't be able to hug the pain away, but damn it, he was going to do his best. I'm sorry, Dick. A sob racked the man's chest. Why was I so mad at him? Why was I so angry? He was just a kid. Just a really, really good kid. Why didn't I care about him more? Why didn't I love him more? Why... At that, Wally maneuvered himself under Dick's arms and over his legs, not caring that he was practically in Dick's lap at this point. He needed to look him in the eye for this, but Dick wasn't done. I told him I'd be there, and if he ever needed me, I would be there. I promised him Wally cupped Dick's face, thumb gently wiping away at the tears, making their way down his cheeks. At least his eyes didn't look quite so lifeless now. Dickie, listen to me. You couldn't have known. Literally, there was no possible way for you to have known. You can't blame yourself for this. He put as much force as he could into the words, willing Dick to believe him as he poured as much love as he could into his eyes. It did something. Dick's expression crumbled, a loud sob tearing out of his throat. He said that it... Gently, Wally pressed his forehead against the bridge of Dick's nose, eyes closing. Dick, whatever that man said is wrong. You had no way of knowing, and Bruce is the one who had every chance to tell you. Please don't blame yourself for this. He was the one meant to take care of Jason, not you. His brother's name only made Dick sob harder. Any attempt at words were drowned out as his arms suddenly came to wrap around Wally, clutching at his shirt. Wally let Dick melt into the hug, wrapping his own arms around Dick's neck and pulling his head down. The resulting soaking of his shoulder was well worth the release Dick finally seemed to get. He wasn't sure how long the two held each other. Just that when Dick finally loosened his grip, they were side by side against the couch. Wally's legs were still loosely around Dick's. Wally couldn't see Dick's face from where it was still buried in his shoulder, but he felt Dick lean his head against Wally's. After a moment, only broken up by quiet hiccups and sniffs, Dick spoke up again. Do you think he hated me? In the end. Dick hated how broken his best friend sounded. Dick, I hate me. Okay. Wally sat back up a little, looking Dick in the eye again. Dick, the beautiful man, who had never stopped pushing for things to be better, to bring light into the world, who ever since he was barely older than 10, walked kids home and brought them ice cream, who had snatched Jason up after not even a week and made sure he knew how much he was loved, who never let any of the Titans forget the lengths he would go for them, and would give every part of himself if it meant that they got to go home safe, who never seemed to understand how others could love him as much as he loved them. Wally couldn't imagine hating Dick Grayson. You know what I think? Dick nodded, his hand slipping down to rest on Wally's thighs. He vowed to ignore that particular detail. I think Jason knew how much you loved him. I think he knew how hard you tried to give him the best life you could, even with Bruce being Bruce and vigilantism. Wally hoped he wasn't imagining the way Dick's lips twitched upward. You're just saying that, he argued, eyes focusing somewhere around Wally's collarbone. He leaned his head down, looking up at Dick. I'm not. Do you want to know how I know? Dick's eyebrows quirked in curiosity. Wally turned, still leaning his side against Dick's, as he nodded towards the stack of books in the corner. Jay grew up in Crime Alley, right? Dick nodded. Homeless for a while, before Bruce took him in? Another nod. Well, growing up like that, I'm sure he guarded his stuff closely, right? Didn't let it out of sight? Dick swallowed, eyes going hazy again. Wally gently bumped his shoulder against Dick's, trying to shake him out of his stupor. And yet, here his stuff is. His favorite book, even. All the way in Bloodhaven. That makes me think that he knew something. He knew that they'd be safe here. Safe with you. He shifted again, making Dick face him for this next part. I think he knew that the love you had for him wasn't just out of obligation or proximity, that it would keep going and stretching as far as it needed to reach him, even from space. His hand slipped down, fingers looping around Dick's wrist. The man didn't seem to notice, watery blue eyes locking on Wally's. I think he trusted you, Dick. Trusted that you'd keep loving him, even when you weren't around. Trusted that he could come back here. Come back to you, without worrying about that love expiring. He let his words sink in, leaning his head against Dick's shoulder. Or at least that's what I think. It wasn't long before Dick was racked with another outburst of sobs. He turned to face Wally, a silent question. He smiled in return, opening the arm that wasn't pressed against Dick's side in invitation. The man took it, throwing himself over Wally, and clinging fast, clawing at his jacket, as if trying to pull every part of him to Dick's heaving chest. Wally let him do what he needed to, rubbing circles into his back, even as Dick thrashed, as if trying to absorb him. He eventually settled, somehow now on Wally's legs, pressing the speedster's back against the old couch. His head was resting again on his shoulder, only this time with his face pressed against his neck, lips ghosting along his nape. He tried to hide the way he stiffened when he felt Dick's hot breath against him. If Wally was a stronger man, perhaps he wouldn't have noticed the way Dick was curled in his lap, pressing his back against the couch, while clinging to every part of Wally. Perhaps he'd be too absorbed in worry and grief for his heart to quicken and mouth to dry. But alas, he was just a redhead from the Midwest, hopelessly in love with his best friend. He wasn't an idiot. In fact, Wally was very aware that his feelings towards Dick had shifted at some point. From best friend he'd die for, to holy fuck, can I marry him? But now wasn't the time for that. So Wally stamped down that part of his brain that wanted to pepper kisses along Dick's face until he felt better, and focused on holding his best friend close, feeling their hearts beat warm against each other. He would hold him as long as he needed to, stay in Bloodhaven until he was sure Dick would be okay on his own. Let him sob into 100 shirts if it meant that he could bring himself to smile on the other side. God, what Wally would do to keep Dick smiling. A private smile found its way onto his face as he rested his head against Dick's. Despite it all, sue him for finding some comfort in that, in the depths of his grief. Dick was in the arms of someone who loved him dearly. I got you, Rob, he muttered. Let it out, I'll be here. Later, Dick's sobs would slow, his tears run dry. Later, Wally would help him to his feet and into a warm bath before quickly fetching them both a mini feast from Batburger, courtesy of Jess, the graveyard shift worker. Later, after Dick was dried off and in bed, he would thank Wally in a tired mumble, clinging to his wrist. Wally would smile then, staying by his side until Dick fell asleep. before scurrying off to a 24-hour store around the corner. There was still work to be done, after all. How's Dick? What? How do you know where I went? Wally, be serious. Is he okay? I think he will be. Good. You'll let us know when he's up for us visiting. Of course, Donna. I wouldn't leave you without your Wonder Twin. Good. I'm glad he has you there with him. Don't worry. I ain't going anywhere. 5. Wally was dead. The words were like knives digging into his flesh, carving him open. Deeper they settled, foreign and dangerous and horrible. He knew he shouldn't be alone, knew that he should call Babs, or Donna, or Garth, or any of the Titans. Even Roy might be better than sitting here alone. But he couldn't move, couldn't force himself to his feet. To see the apartment that they'd shared in every way that mattered for the last few months. Because Wally West was dead. And so he sat on the side of his bed. His phone buzzed again in his hand. It blinked to life, message notifications flooding the screen. Tim, Alfred, and even Bruce. They hadn't spoken since Jason died. Dick wished he could scream, could slip into the rage he tried so hard to box away, could go out and beat something senseless until he got the answer he was looking for, could understand why it was okay that the world had lost Wally West. But he couldn't muster up anything. He just felt empty, gutted, like he was falling, hands grasping for the next bar to catch him, or freckled arms to swing from. There was nothing, just empty air to fall through. Part of him wanted to hit the bottom. Dick was scared of that voice. He glanced back down at his phone, having navigated unconsciously to his photos. Emerald eyes met his. It was a selfie. Wally with his eyes crossed and half out of frame. Dick passed out in the background. The laptop beside him was a video call. Gar just barely discernible in the middle. He scrolled to the next pic. This one he remembered taking. Wally in midair, lightning flashing as he somersaulted between buildings. It had taken at least a couple tries before the speedster was satisfied, determined to look like Sonic. The third one made Dick's throat close. Wally was upside down, hanging by his legs from the bar at the gymnastics place he demanded Dick take him to. His tongue was sticking out, playfully winking at the camera. He had wanted to learn some acrobatics moves, claiming it was for hero work. Dick was pretty sure Wally was just trying to get him out of the house, make him do something he loved. Wally had tried swinging between the uneven bars, using his speed to bounce between them. He had gotten stuck upside down moments later. While trying to figure out how to land on his hands, Dick had pulled out his phone. The speedster had pouted before posing for the picture with a laugh. God, Dick had wanted to kiss him right then and there. He wished he had. He brought his phone up to his lips, planting a gentle kiss on the screen. His mouth came back cold. Too little, too late. Tears dripped down the image, running in rivulets towards his lap. Dick let himself sob, phone dropping to the floor. His arms wrapped around himself, imagining they were Wally's. What had he said when he lost Jason, barely 5 months ago? I think he trusted you, Dick. Trusted you to keep loving him. He hoped Wally had the same trust in Dick, because he would. God, he would never stop. Guilt curled in his gut. Maybe Wally wouldn't want him to. It was his idea, after all. His mission, his team, his fault. Maybe Wally would hate him too. Maybe... An imaginary finger flicked his forehead, an echo from the last time he thought this. Hey, don't go shit-talking my best friend. He's doing his best. Not everything's his fault. Dick couldn't help but smile. Wally was still helping him grieve, even when he was the one being mourned. Minutes passed before another memory washed over him. Rise and shine, sunshine! Even if it's just the living room, you ain't sitting in bed all day. He found himself getting to his feet at the reminder, ghostly hands wrapping around his wrists and pulling him out the doorway. Come on, Dickie. I know it's hard. Let's at least get some food in you, okay? Then we'll sit down. Hands around his waist lead him to the kitchen, towards the fridge, pulling out the leftover fried rice Iris had made them that weekend. He ate silently, sipping slowly on a glass of water. When his throat refused to eat anymore, he boxed the rest up and returned to the fridge. Sounds like we've got dinner sorted. Dick nodded to himself, idly examining what was left in the fridge. There wasn't a lot. Dick nodded to himself. Can you grab the stuff for vodka pasta after work? I want to make it tonight. Dick had Iris's recipe saved to his phone, from the moment she taught him how to make it. He turned around, eyes drifting to the door. Wally was standing there, pulling on his shoes, a sleeveless hoodie snug around his chest. Emerald green eyes brightening, a freckled hand reaching out to him. Go on a run with me? Dick followed suit, pulling on his shoes and a thicker hoodie, picking up his phone on the way and stuffing it into his pocket. Be good while I'm gone, okay? 3 square meals, plenty of water, 8 hours of sleep, no stab wounds? Can you do that for me, Rob? I'll try, Wally. For you, Dick murmured, not looking at the hallucination beside him. Still, he felt Wally's radiant smile, his playful boob against his nose, his arms around his waist. You're the strongest guy I know, Dick. He shut the door behind him, running shoes on and grocery list in hand. Hey, Dick, it's Barry. I just wanted to check in, kiddo. See how you were. Iris and I wanted to invite you to come out and stay with us for a little while. Maybe help go through your stuff, if you're feeling up to it. Call us back when you're free. The offer will always be open. Donna tells me you haven't been in touch with the Titans lately. Maybe give them a call too? There are a lot of folks who care about you. Don't go forgetting that, okay? Call us back soon. Love you, Dick. +1. One moment, he was nothing. Every part of what he once was replaced by a rushing force propelling him through itself. Light, sound, space, matter, existence itself, left far, far behind him. Then he stopped. Reality crashed into him. Light hit first. The world, both bright and dark, a blur of everything slamming into his eyes. Sound came next, simultaneously, still, and yet reverberating through where his ears used to be. Matter was next, his body crashing into the floor, limp and heavy and tight. Electricity jolted through him, the whirl of lights and sounds, filtering away into what made sense. He was on grass, green and prickly and creeping across his skin. Wind blew in his ears, voices called above him, harsh, pained shouts intermixed with the water dripping onto his neck. Hands were grabbing at his chest and arms, trying to pull him up and away from the earth. Memory hit last, his body pulling in a sharp gasp, as he remembered breathing was vital to existence. His heart hammered wildly in his chest, hidden under yellow fabric. A white and red lightning bolt shone up at him. The hands on him were Uncle Barry's, joyful tears dripping down his face, as he hoisted Wally up into a stretcher, manned by nurses and Justice League doctors who he didn't know. And he was Wally West, alive. Wally had spent 3 years in the Speed Force. It had taken Barry, 1 to get approved for expeditions to look for him, another to figure out how to do it consistently and safely, and a dozen expeditions, going deeper and deeper each time until he finally found him. Wally lasted 3 weeks in the hospital before he was completely sick of everything. His room had been a resolving conference of friends, family, acquaintances, friends of family of friends, thinks bats, and then back to friends. Don't get him wrong, it was awesome seeing his loved ones again, when the last conscious thought he had had was that he'd never see them again. But also, if he got asked if he was doing okay one more time, he was going to lose it. Wally was fine. Sure, his senses were all screwy, and he was always feeling either over or understimulated. And yes, every time he even so much as brushed the Speed Force, he felt exponentially worse, but he didn't need to be in the hospital for that. In fact, what made him feel worse, okay, fine, the speed thing still took first place. Second worst was the look in everyone's eyes. Some tried to hide it more than others. He could almost pretend like Garth, Raven, and Victor weren't actively soaking him up in their eyes. He could almost pretend with them like things were okay, that they hadn't grieved and mourned him for 3 years, and that they hadn't completely changed as people. But they had. The Titans were all but disbanded. Dick, Victor, and Donna had officially joined the League, though Nightwing apparently tried to keep his distance. Garth was spending almost all of his time in Atlantis. Raven and Gar had joined Young Justice, essentially the next generation of Titans, headed by Tim Drake, who was no longer a baby-faced Robin, but instead a full-fledged hero and leader now. Corey and Roy hadn't stopped by yet, apparently deep undercover with their own team, one led by Jason, I'm not dead now, bitch, Todd, who was an anti-hero. Suffice to say, Wally wasn't touching that last bit with a 30-foot pole. At least, not right now. Wally felt sick. He didn't know what was worse, knowing that he'd lost 3 years of his friends' lives, or consistently being reminded of that fact every time they caught his eye. Iris and Barry weren't much better. They were doing their best, but it was their nature to worry. Neither seemed wholly calm, always checking on him, seeing if his blankets were too hot or too cold or too fuzzy or too smooth. If it wasn't the blanket, it was the food, or the water, or his clothes, or literally anything within his room. He was going a little bit nuts under their constant stress over him. And there was Dick, who didn't look at him with pity, or worry, or like a ghost back from the dead. In fact, Dick seemed to try and look at him as little as possible. His best friend, could he even call him that anymore? Visited often, spending hours in the room listening to Wally vent. At least that hadn't changed. But whenever he was around, he'd look out the window, or at the foot of his bed, or even just sit with his eyes closed. Wally knew he was always in his periphery. He could feel the weight of Dick's attention, just never his eyes. But that was fine. Dick was still showing his support, even if the lack of eye contact confused Wally to no end. It was 3 weeks before the Justice League staff discharged him. Wally tugged uselessly at the t-shirt Iris brought him. It wasn't bad, a simple turquoise made of some blend that felt like silk, maybe a little itchy. He snapped to attention when his aunt entered the room, raising an eyebrow when she softly shut the door behind her. Hey baby, how are you? Wally tried to stifle an annoyed huff, threatening to leak out. I'm alright. Excited to get out of here. He must not have hidden it well enough, as Iris's eyes flickered with sadness. Sorry, Aunt, She sighed, sitting down on the bed beside him. No, it's alright. Her hand came back to rest gently on his, thumb rubbing over the back of his hand. I know your uncle and I have been a lot recently, and I'm not going to apologize for that. You're our Wally. It's our job to worry about you. But we've been a lot. He didn't argue with her, instead raising an eyebrow at her, wondering where she was going with this. Wally, you're an adult, and while Barry and I will never stop worrying and caring and trying to smother you to pieces, we know that that's not really what you need. So we've talked to Dick, and he suggested you stay with him for a while in Bloodhaven instead of coming with us to Central. Wally's eyebrows shot upward. Seriously? He wasn't a fan of how his heart leapt at the suggestion. Iris nodded. Now, you don't have to. Personally, I know which option I prefer, but if you think it will help you settle, your uncle and I will give our full support. We just want you to be happy. A guilty pang rang through his chest. Sorry. I didn't mean to be ungrateful. You and Barry have always done so much for me, and I love you both, I always will, but... Wally grasped for words. His aunt gripped his hand, understanding in her eyes. "It's okay, we know. We'll always love you too, but you need your own space and time." "Did Dick talk to you guys?" "He didn't need to. The walls here aren't soundproof, you know," Iris answered with a sad smile. Wally flushed. Sorry." She shook her head with a laugh. "No more of that, okay?" She stood up, planting a kiss on his airline. "Should I let Dick know to get his place ready?" Wally nodded shyly. Dick, as had been customary for the last 3 years, picked up the ingredients for vodka pasta on his way home. Admittedly, he didn't need much this time. Really, only shallots, parmesan, and heavy cream. There was plenty of tomato paste in the fridge, and he'd long since stocked up on panini. He pointedly ignored the Wally lingering at the end of the aisle, turning just enough to keep it in his periphery. The real Wally was in his apartment, working on college applications for the fall. It had taken a few phone calls. Reed, Wayne Enterprises' entire legal team, "No, Tim, it's not warm-up for if Jason asks," to get Wally declared legally alive, again. And his college credits fully transferred. But his best friend was, once again, all set to finish his education. Besides, the real Wally would never awkwardly linger at the end of the aisle watching Dick. Part of him felt bad for ignoring the apparitions that had accompanied him for the last several lonely years. Then he remembered the hallucination Wally did not have feelings and was a figment of his imagination, and that he really should have talked to someone about over the years. But he made the years less lonely, and pestering Dick like the real Wally would have, so he let it pass. "Aunt said a good shallot is kinda heavy, right?" Dick lightly tossed the vegetable in his hand, its papery skin coming off on his fingers. Good enough. Plus, it was at least easy enough to ignore the hallucination. No, it wasn't. Dick rarely felt the compulsion to spill his guts to the empty air, unlike with the real Wally. It was a tense juggle. He made sure he was always open and present whenever Wally was around, in case his friend needed to vent or just company. It wasn't uncommon that the redhead would just slump against him on the couch in odd increments, shifting almost constantly. Whenever he would settle, Dick would make sure to smile, leaning against his friend, for just a moment, to make sure he knew Dick wouldn't mind. They'd even forgone the couch before, and simply made a nest of blankets and pillows in the floor. Wally seemed to embrace those maybe half of the time. But Dick made sure not to say too much. It was easy enough to offer advice or support. He'd been doing it for years. Focusing on other people's problems and lives was easy. He could handle those. He had been careful whenever Wally asked him about his own. Every time the question popped up, which was often, because Wally was nothing if not social and reciprocal, he made sure to tiptoe around all but the most light-hearted topics. Cass's new ballet classes, Tim's prowess as a leader, Alfred's new pastry recipe. He knew Wally was on to him. He always was better at reading him than most people. The man's eyes would narrow sometimes, a frown playing on his lips. Dick hated to be the reason Wally was worried. But it was better this way. The redhead had his own recovery to worry about. No reason for Dick to trauma dump on him. "So, fun fact, Dick, I like being there for you. Shocker, I know. I like knowing that you're talking to someone, even if it's not me. If it means my best friend is getting support he needs. Yes, that makes me happy, dumbass." Dick remembers that conversation. It wasn't long after Jason's death. Wally had been so insistent. It was like the rest of Wally's demands. Dick had tried to follow through. He had talked to Wally about Jason, about Bruce, about Babs. It was nothing that hadn't already been said, but Wally was right. It had helped a little. Then Wally was gone. The hallucination seemed to get drowned out every time it tried to mention the advice. Tim's late-night shrieks after his ordeal with the Joker, that man's bloody laughter as Dick caved in his face, the squeak of Bab's wheelchair, the crack of Jason's guns. the huff of Bruce, the rain as Catalina. Dick wrenched himself back to the present, jerkily dropping a bag of Wally's snacks into the trunk of his car. A familiar feeling started crawling up his throat, kind emerald eyes pleading with him to tell it all. He took a swig of his water with a scowl. Wally blinked awake at the sound of bustling from the kitchen. He popped up, blearily looking around, squinting at the light. A blanket had been thrown over his stomach, one of the lighter ones with different textures on each side. He had been using it a lot since he moved in with Dick. The man in question was in the kitchen, a pot over the stove with a large saucepan off to the side. He wandered over, taking a seat at the bar while Dick worked. His friend smiled, tilting his chin towards him, but keeping his eyes trained on the red sauce bubbling away. "Hello, Sleeping Beauty." "Hey." Wally had gotten used to the lack of eye contact, though it still left a bad taste in his mouth. It had helped, a little, seeing his friend home 3 years later, knowing that Dick's life was mostly stable. His fridge was freshly stocked, clothes clean, had a growing stack of board games. Relieved Wally more than he cared to admit. He really wanted to believe that Dick had recovered from his grief, that getting Jason back had magically fixed everything for his friend, and that he had been living a pleasant vigilante lifestyle for the last few years. But there weren't any new pictures of his friends on the wall. There were just as few of his new family members, birthdays and adoption parties. But nothing newer than those. None of the new team members, no new friends, not even a partner, which didn't make Wally as happy as he thought it would. He was hoping it was just Dick hiding things for his sake, to pretend like it hadn't been 3 years. But then he saw the stiffness in Dick's movements. How smiles never quite reached his eyes. How, aside from the odd video call or home invasion, he didn't see his family, despite it being bigger than ever before, and Dick loved them all dearly. How, where before he could see through whatever mask Dick put up, all he could see now was the emptiness in the corner of his eyes. The only cracks he ever saw in his facade were in the late nights after Dick's patrols, when his throat would tremble and his eyes got wet and desperate. On those nights, it was like watching an internal war, words being strangled and dragged out beneath the surface again and again. Wally hated feeling helpless. He hated watching Dick suffer, but all the prodding in the world hadn't made Dick open up, and he didn't have it in him to push any harder. So he just hugged his friend, sat with him until he fell asleep, and let Dick come to him on his own terms. That last part hadn't happened yet. Instead, Wally watched him make vodka pasta for the 4th Saturday in a row. "Never knew you liked it so much. I'd have saved you more," Wally mused. Dick's back straightened and his hand twitched a little as he poured in the heavy cream. He shrugged. It's like tradition at this point." "Tradition?" "Every Saturday for dinner." "Since when?" Dick's light smile slipped. Since you disappeared." "Ah." Wally forced himself to smile, despite the somber mood that had latched onto Dick. "Well, at least I know you were eating well." Dick hummed, stirring the sauce. "Come on, humor me. Have you been taking care of yourself? 3 square meals?" "Plenty of water, 8 hours of sleep, no stab wounds," Dick answered, leaning away while the sauce softened. Wally smiled. "Really? That's awesome, man." Dick muttered something under his breath. Wally, just barely making out the word, "forget." "Sorry?" he asked, leaning forward. Dick's gaze flickered towards him, not quite on him, stopping somewhere off to his left. "Nothing. It's nothing." Wally sighed under his breath, accepting that he wasn't going to get another answer. "So, how was your day? Anything interesting at the station?" he said with forced cheer. His friend hummed noncommittally. "Not much. Pretty standard. How are the applications going?" "They're fine. How's Tim?" Wally asked, resisting Dick's attempt at redirection. "He's good. Out with his team until next week. Did you decide if you're going back to CCU?" There was a sharpness in Dick's voice, one that he could barely make out, but was unmistakable. He sighed. This wasn't going anywhere. Closing his eyes in frustration, he muttered out, "Haven't decided." That was a lie. He decided against returning to his first college almost immediately, even though it would save him the trouble of having to transfer his credits, and hope for the best. There would be far too many questions from his professors about his absence. Part of him played around with the idea of going to Gotham U. It was close, reputable, and had plenty of connections to the job market. Plus, he'd stay close to Dick. The other part wasn't sure if he even wanted that at this point. Yes, he did. This was torture. This endless loop of dancing around the topic of his death. Around what he'd missed. After almost 5 weeks of living with the man, Wally still barely knew anything about his life other than that he worked with the police force and patrolled as Nightwing. That was it. He knew he'd have to confront Dick soon, if his own short temper was any sign. He didn't want to blow up at the man. He'd always done so much, and even if Wally was slowly losing his mind, he didn't want the conversation to be an angry one. "Everything okay?" Wally looked up. Dick was standing there, a large saucepan now filled with pasta and orange sauce. A melting sprinkle of Parmesan across the top, with bright parsley. His stomach growled. Dick grabbed 2 plates before Wally realized he was being asked. "Oh, yeah, fine." He knew he hadn't been convincing. Dick let it go, however, sitting beside him and helping himself to some of the food. His friend elbowed him lightly. "If you're sure, let me know if that changes." He hummed in response. The silence between them stretched. Wally felt Dick's eyes flicker over to him occasionally, and he forced himself not to react. He hadn't reached for his food, coming to terms with his decision. Finally, it seemed too much for Dick. "Wally? Can I talk to you?" He answered quickly, forcing the words out before he could chicken out. Dick must have sensed something in his tone, because he reacted immediately, turning towards Wally and looking at him. Really looking at him, for what felt like the first time since he'd been back. "Yeah, of course." Wally felt his voice falter under the attention. The script he'd been laying out for the last few days suddenly forgotten. Clear blue eyes met his, dragging over him slowly, dissecting him as if it was peeling Wally apart to find the issue. His mouth went dry. Fuck. So much for Bravo. He forced himself to look away, eyes suddenly glued to the untouched pasta before him. Dick's gaze didn't leave him, the hairs on his neck standing on end. This needed to happen. Now. So... He stuttered, ears flushing. Dick rubbed his shoulder encouragingly. He took a forced breath, holding it for longer than strictly necessary. "We need to talk," he affirmed. Dick continued to massage his shoulder. "It's been 3 years. You've changed." The hand stilled. "Shit. And that's a good thing. It is," he reassured quickly, turning to him. His expression had closed off again. Head carefully tilted in confusion. His hand hadn't left Wally. He took another breath, a real one this time. "Look, I know things are different. You don't have to pretend like they aren't. Of course things will change. They're supposed to. But me, I already lost 3 years of my life. I don't want to lose any more trying to live in the past. I want to move forward." Dick's eyes taken on a sympathetic sheen. Wally continued, suddenly invigorated. "I want to stay here. I want to know the new you. I want to learn about your life now, and figure out where I can fit in, even if it's not the same as before." He lifted up his hand to where Dick's was, holding it lightly. "You're still my best friend, Dick. It's okay if I'm not yours, but I want you in my life, whatever that means now. So, will you just talk to me?" he pleaded, studying Dick. The vigilante hadn't reacted until the final question, gaze briefly becoming guarded, and his throat bobbing. Wally, it's... He interrupted himself, his eyes suddenly becoming frantic. The internal war was back on. The other hand, the one Wally hadn't accidentally taken hostage, drifting to his neck. His nails tightening, jabbing the soft skin. Wally's free hand immediately went to his neck, gently trying to pry it off before Dick could hurt himself. The movement seemed to break Dick's stalemate. I want to, Wally, I swear I want to. I want nothing more than to tell you everything. But... His throat seemed to close again, the fingers digging deeper. He took a frantic breath. Hey, it's okay. Just breathe, man. Wally was still trying to get Dick to release his own neck, tugging a little more forcefully. It was only then that Dick seemed to notice the pain, letting Wally pull him back. Blue eyes paused, locking on the freckled hand around his. Suddenly, Dick was on his feet, Wally's wrist in his grasp. You're still my best friend, he stressed, closing even more of the distance between them. Wally, you are the most important person in my life. That hasn't changed. Please, I swear, I promise, Wally was leaning back so far that he was almost off the stool, his face bright red. Okay, I believe you. He felt his stomach swoop, a smile creeping onto his face. Not the time, West. Okay, I believe you. Dick paused, eyes intense as they searched Wally for any sign of lie. Satisfied by his answer, his gaze softened, helping Wally sit up. He didn't let go of his hand, his thumb rubbing against the skin. Sorry, he said, awkwardly. For what? He shrugged. I don't know, feels like I messed something up. He muttered, mouth quirking upward. Ever the martyr, he looked ridiculous. Wally grinned. There was the dumbass he remembered. I'll figure it out. How to talk about what's happened. Soon. Before you go back to college, he promised. Wally must have been feeling brave, Dick's confession about his importance looping in his mind. This was not going as he thought it would. He let his head rest on the pair of hands still on his shoulder, and Dick stilled. No rush, man. I was thinking of staying local anyway. We can figure it out together, he tried to say nonchalantly, even as his ears warmed. Local? Wait, you want to stay here? Wally thought Dick looked rather adorable. He shrugged casually. I mean, if you'll let me. Yes, of course. Dick fake coughed awkwardly. I mean, what about Iris and Barry? Central City? I can take a Zeta. Or, well, I need to get used to running again eventually. He trailed off. Dick was subconsciously running a thumb along his chin, causing Wally's brain to stutter. Or maybe the man knew exactly what he was doing. You want to stay here, he clarified slowly. He nodded. You want to stay with me? Wally let himself lean into the touch. Of course, you're the most important person in my life, too. Now it was Dick's turn to flush. He looked away, a smile forcing its way onto his face. Gone was any semblance of the mask. You can't just say things like that, he mumbled. You said it first, Wally retorted, sliding off his stool, glaring up at the other man. Dick's hand was fully cupping his face, now, but he certainly wasn't going to complain. The two playfully glared at each other, unable to stop the smiles on their faces. He was very aware of how red their faces were. They were practically chest to chest. He was beautiful, cheeks fuller than they were 3 years ago. Clearly, he wasn't lying about eating well. Dick's black hair was almost to his shoulders, cascading in waves. It looked well kept. Wally could stare at the soft smile dancing in his eyes for days. He wondered what Dick was seeing. Dick broke first, chuckling as his expression melted. His thumb was in line with Wally's nose now, long fingers curling around his head warmly. Eyes clear as the sky roam across his freckles, pausing briefly on his lips. Wally knew what was coming. Can I... Wally's hand flew upward, catching the back of Dick's neck, hair tickling at his fingers. He tugged his friend downward, pressing his mouth to his. The kiss was messy, desperate. He'd missed a little in the rush, lips pressing a little too low on Dick's lips. He broke away first, pulling back just enough to watch Dick's expression. Blue eyes were blown wide, staring at him in shock. I have wanted to do that for 2 months, Wally said, more than a little breathless. Dick smiled, his other hand grabbing Wally's waist towards him. He pulled him into another kiss. This one slower, like he was savoring every second of touch. Wally felt lightheaded by the time he finally separated. I wanted to do that for years, he said, his voice husky. Wally once again understood how Dick Grayson had all of Gotham swooning, as if he could ever forget. I've liked you since we were kids, he insisted, proving his point with a light kiss on his nose. He wanted to get a picture and frame Dick's playful pout. So did I. Wally's arms hooked around Dick's neck, leaning towards the man. Bet I fell first. I hope not. I'm 2 years younger, Wallace. Wally slapped him lightly. The two stood like that for a moment, just breathing in each other's presence. The truth finally out in the open, his heart swelled. But when he tried to go for another kiss, Dick blocked him with a finger to his lips. Nope, no more kissing. Not until you eat. Before he could protest, Dick turned Wally around, lightly pushing him back towards the stool with the now cool pasta. He forced Wally into the seat, but left his arm around his shoulders, chin resting on Wally's head. The speedster grumbled, leaning against Dick, while finally picking up his fork. He hummed appreciatively at the taste. It really might be better than Iris's at this point. Dick mumbled nonsense above him, more of his weight slumping into Wally. He could feel the exhaustion in his frame. Dick planted a soft kiss to his hair. Wally let himself relax in the gentle hold, tilting his head upward to look at the man above him. The beautiful, incredible man who welcomed him with open arms and wanted him to stay, who he wanted to stay for, who he couldn't imagine being without. God, he was happy to be alive again. That night found the two of them on the couch, blankets piled around them. Wally's legs were over Dick's lap, his arms tight around his boyfriend's chest. Because, yes, they were now. Most certainly. Walls, I'm begging you, don't try to go to Gotham U. Their science department is shit, because anytime they try and improve it, the rogues go and steal everything. Seriously. They got in a shipment of hydraulic acid once, and it was gone by morning. Tim says they even stole a vial of gallium, but okay. I'll find somewhere else. One near a Zeta. He laughed. His head lolled against Dick's shoulder. I still can't believe you want to stay here, in Bloodhaven, with me, he confessed. Wally shrugged. I got my life back. I decided I wanted to spend it with you. Dick pressed a fond kiss to his forehead. You think your folks will be mad with me? I don't think they expected me to basically steal you away to the sister city of Gotham. You're worried about my family? Dude, look at yours. Jason was a crime lord last year. Oh, please, he's not that bad. Plus, it's Cass you'll have to look out for. And B. My point exactly. Notes. Massive thank you to Jade for beta-ing. She's awesome, seriously, y'all. Don't know how many dumb mistakes she saved y'all from. There's a sequel. I'm gonna get permission to do the sequel, because it is great. To explain the thought process on 2 with the whole, would you kill for him thing. The way I see it, little Grayson had a weird relationship with death and murder. And with B's whole non-murder policy, I could see Dick thinking that's just a standard most superheroes hold themselves to. So, Barry being willing, or even simply believing he would be willing, to kill for Wally would be one of the highest determinants of love/care. Whether Barry actually would kill for Wally is irrelevant, because Barry thinks he would be willing to. meaning that he loves Wally enough to believe himself capable of breaking that rule, thus still making it okay for Dick to not kill Zuko, because it's less an act of murder and more so the willingness to dirty your soul with it that's the act of love, not the bloodlust itself. So, all this to say, mayhaps Dick would have a complex over Bee not being willing to kill for his kids, and seeing Wally as more loved by Barry than his family is by Bruce. But that's neither here nor there, and I ain't touching that with a 30-foot pole. Besides, Dick is 14 then. 100% I could see nuance and understanding seep in. This is a weird tangent to go on. Also, the words that I butchered earlier are, sleep well, I love you, which is amazing.
Rio de Janeiro. Rio
de Janeiro. I'm gonna butcher this regardless. Hello, you're back. How are you supposed to pronounce pasta names? I don't care enough. It's pasta. It doesn't matter.